Some silences cut deeper than any scream. And in this house, silence was all they had left. A ranch house sitting alone against the endless Montana sky, where the wind carries echoes of laughter that no longer exists. Where a father watches his 7-year-old son move through their home like a ghost haunting his own life. He was only 7, but he carried grief like a grown man carries the weight of the world. His father, a rancher named Elias who could face down any storm, break any wild horse, survive any hardship the land threw at him, couldn't face the hollow that had opened in his boy's chest. The boy hadn't said a word since they buried his mother. Not one word. Not even when the neighbor's dog got loose and ate half their chickens. Not even when lightning split the old oak tree where his mama used to push his swing. Not even when his father sat beside his bed every night, whispering stories into the darkness, hoping, praying, for just one sound from those silent lips. The doctors in town had a name for it. Trauma-induced mutism, they called it. As if giving it a fancy name could somehow fix what was broken inside a little boy who watched his mama slip away while he held her hand. So the father did the only thing left to do. He wrote a prayer, disguised as a help-wanted sign. Teacher needed. Must be good with children. Room and board provided. Inquire at the Morrison Ranch, 5 miles east of town. He hammered that sign to the fence post with hands that shook, not from the cold morning air, but from the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, could reach the child he was losing more every day. For 3 weeks, that sign swayed in the relentless prairie wind. 3 weeks of false hopes as drifters and opportunists knocked on his door. 3 weeks of watching his son retreat further into himself with each disappointment. 3 weeks of wondering if he'd failed as both a husband and a father. The boy, Samuel, would sit by the window every morning, watching the road with eyes that had forgotten how to hope. His breakfast would grow cold as he waited for something he couldn't name. His father would find him there hours later, small face pressed against the glass, waiting for a miracle that never came. Until the day it did. That's when she appeared. Clara stumbled to their gate like she was running from death itself. Her dress, once probably blue, was now the color of dust and desperation. Her shoes were worn clean through at the heels. Her dark hair had escaped whatever pins had once held it, hanging in wild tangles around a face that spoke of sleepless nights and terrible choices. But it was her eyes that stopped Elias cold. They burned with the kind of desperation that made decent people look away, the look of someone who had 3 days to live and knew it. She had clutched a crumpled newspaper in her fist, the ink smeared from her sweaty palm. The same newspaper that had carried his advertisement for the past 3 weeks. The sign, "I can teach. Please, I need this work." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Elias could hear everything she wasn't saying. This wasn't about wanting work. This was about survival. Behind her, maybe a mile back on the dusty road, 3 riders sat motionless on their horses. Waiting. Watching. Patient as vultures circling a dying animal. The cowboy emerged fully from the shadows of his porch, studying her with eyes that had learned to read desperation in all its forms. Ranch life taught you to spot trouble before it spotted you. And this woman was drowning in it. "You're running from something." It wasn't a question. "I'm running to something," she replied, lifting her chin with a pride that her circumstances couldn't quite crush. "Your son needs a teacher. I need work. That's all that matters." But even as she spoke, her eyes kept darting back to those distant riders, and her hands trembled despite her brave words. That's when Samuel appeared. The boy materialized from behind the porch post like a shy animal drawn by something he couldn't resist. 7 years old, but his eyes held the weight of winter, the kind of winter that settles in your bones and never quite leaves. He stared at Clara with an intensity that made her breath catch. Here was a child who understood loss, who recognized a kindred spirit when he saw one. "I don't hire strangers," Elias said carefully. But then something happened that hadn't happened in 8 long, silent months. The boy, his beautiful, broken boy, slowly approached his father. His small hand reached out, trembling and hesitant, and tugged once on his father's coat sleeve. "Please, Papa. Let her stay." He didn't speak the words. Couldn't speak them. But his eyes screamed them loud enough to wake the dead. Elias's breath caught in his throat. His son hadn't asked for anything, not with words, not with gestures, not with anything, since they lowered his mother into the cold ground. "You got troubles following you?" he asked Clara, but his eyes never left his son's face. "The kind that won't hurt your boy. I swear it on my mother's grave." The cowboy looked at his son's face, really looked at it for the first time in months. And there, flickering like a candle flame in the darkness, he saw something he thought had died with his wife, hope. "Fine. You can stay. But if danger follows you here, it won't touch him. I promise you that with everything I have left." But promises are fragile things in a world that breaks them as easily as breathing. And some debts can only be paid in blood. She stepped into a tomb disguised as a home. The front door creaked open to reveal rooms that hadn't felt a woman's touch in 8 months. Everything was functional, clean, cold, like a hotel where no one ever stayed long enough to make it home. The kitchen held the basics. Cast iron pans hung in perfect rows, dishes stacked with military precision, not a single unnecessary thing to soften the hard edges. This was a place where a man fed himself and his child because they needed food to survive, not because meals were meant to nourish the soul. Clara's trained eyes took it all in, the absence of curtains, the lack of photographs on the mantel, the way dust had settled in the corners where a woman's care usually reached. This house was grieving just as much as its inhabitants. "Samuel's room is upstairs, second door on the right," Elias said, his voice carefully neutral. "You can take the room across the hall. I'll bring up your things." But Clara had no things. Just the clothes on her back and a small satchel containing a few precious books she'd managed to save when the debt collectors had seized everything else. At dinner that first night, they sat around the kitchen table like 3 strangers forced together by circumstance. The silence was so thick Clara could almost taste it, heavy and suffocating, like breathing underwater. Samuel ate mechanically, his eyes fixed on his plate. He would glance at his father before each bite, seeking permission for every small action. It broke Clara's heart to watch this child who had learned to make himself invisible in his own home. The cowboy, Elias, she learned, spoke only when absolutely necessary. "Pass the salt. More milk. Time for bed." Each word measured and careful, as if speaking too much might shatter what little peace they'd managed to build. But Clara watched. She saw how Elias's hands shook slightly when he helped Samuel cut his meat. She noticed how he positioned himself between his son and the door, as if protecting him from invisible threats. She saw the love burning in his eyes every time he looked at his boy, a love so fierce it was almost painful to witness. And she saw how Samuel's eyes would find his father when he thought no one was looking, drinking in every expression, every gesture, as if trying to memorize the only parent he had left. This wasn't neglect. This was 2 people drowning in grief, unable to reach each other across the vast ocean of their loss. "Samuel," she said gently after they'd eaten in silence for 10 minutes. "Would you like more bread?" The boy's eyes flew to his father's face, seeking permission. When Elias nodded almost imperceptibly, Samuel looked back at Clara and gave the smallest nod she'd ever seen. "And what about you, Mr. Morrison? How was your day with the cattle?" Elias's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. When was the last time someone had asked him about his day? When was the last time anyone had cared about the small details of his existence? "Fine," he said finally. "Had to fix the fence by Miller's Creek." It wasn't much, but it was something. A crack in the wall of silence. After dinner, Clara began the slow, careful work of weaving life back into the dead spaces. She hummed while washing dishes, the first music these walls had heard in months. Not loudly, not intrusively, just a gentle melody that seemed to make the shadows less oppressive. She read to Samuel by the firelight, her voice soft and warm as she brought fairy tales to life. When he smiled, actually smiled. At her drawing of a brave princess, she nearly wept with joy. That smile was like seeing the first flower push through winter snow. But it was Elias who broke her heart completely. She found him one evening, standing in the doorway of the sitting room, watching her read to Samuel. His face was a battlefield of emotions: pain, longing, jealousy, and something that might have been hope, if hope could survive such devastation. His son was curled against Clara's side, completely relaxed for the first time since she'd arrived. Samuel's eyes were bright with interest, his small hand turning the pages when she nodded. This was what childhood was supposed to look like. "He laughed today," she told Elias later, after Samuel had gone to bed. "I heard." His voice was rough with unshed tears. "When I told him about the silly dragon who was afraid of mice. He actually laughed out loud." Elias nodded, but she could see the pain behind his eyes. His own son wouldn't laugh for him. "You love him so much it's killing you," she said softly. His composure cracked. "I don't know how to reach him anymore. Everything I touch dies." "That's not true. Isn't it? My wife died because of me. She died bringing him into this world, and now I can't even." His voice broke completely. "Samuel doesn't need you to be perfect," Clara whispered fiercely. "He needs you to be present. He needs to know you're not going anywhere. But he lights up for you in ways he never." Elias couldn't finish. His shame was too heavy for words. "He needs us both," Clara said, moving closer. "Different kinds of love. You're his anchor, his safety. I'm just helping him remember how to sail." In that moment, standing in the kitchen with dishes still drying on the counter, something shifted between them. Not spoken, but felt deep in their bones. A recognition that they were both drowning in their separate oceans of grief, and maybe, just maybe, together they could learn to breathe again. The house was still silent that night. But the silence was changing. It was no longer the silence of the grave. It was the silence of something new being born. Small towns devour reputations like wildfire devours wheat fields, fast, merciless, and leaving nothing but ash in their wake. Living out there with two men. Unmarried. It's shameful. Mrs. Henderson's voice carried across the general store like a bell tolling judgment. That poor boy needs proper guidance. Not some fallen woman who showed up from God knows where. The miller's wife clicked her tongue in disapproval, loud enough for Clara to hear every word. Clara felt their judgment like physical blows as she moved through the narrow aisles, gathering the few supplies Elias had asked her to pick up. Coffee, sugar, lamp oil. Simple things that had become complicated by the weight of their stares. At the general store counter, conversations died the moment she approached. Women who had been chatting animatedly suddenly found urgent interest in their shopping lists. Men tipped their hats but avoided her eyes. "Will that be all, miss?" The store owner's voice was professionally polite but cold as January wind. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Patterson." She counted out her coins carefully, money Elias had given her for household expenses, but every penny felt like charity under the townspeople's scrutiny. Behind her, the whispers resumed before she'd even reached the door, like water rushing back to fill a void. What kind of example is she setting for that innocent child? Someone should write to the county. Report this arrangement. That boy's been through enough without having a woman of questionable virtue raising him. The words followed her out into the dusty street, each one a small knife between her shoulder blades. At the church on Sunday, the rejection was even more pronounced. Clara sat in the back pew, alone, while families shifted away like she carried some contagious disease. The preacher spoke of charity and Christian love, but his congregation seemed to have selective hearing. Young mothers pulled their children closer when she passed, as if her mere presence might corrupt their innocence. The church ladies who organized social events looked right through her, making their disapproval clear without saying a word. "Miss Sullivan?" A gentle voice stopped her after the service. She turned to find Mrs. Walsh, the schoolteacher from town. An older woman with kind eyes and silver hair pinned neatly under a simple hat. Yes. I wanted to say, what you're doing for that boy is good work. Don't let them tell you otherwise. It was the first kindness a stranger had shown her since she'd arrived, and Clara had to blink back tears. Thank you, she whispered. Small minds make for small hearts, Mrs. Walsh said quietly. Samuel Morrison has been in my prayers since his mother passed. If you're helping him heal, then you're doing God's work, no matter what they say. But one kind word couldn't drown out the chorus of condemnation. That evening, Clara sat at the kitchen table, heavy with shame and doubt. The town's talking about me, she told Elias when he came in from checking the cattle. He hung his hat on its peg and turned to face her. Let them talk. But it reflects on Samuel. On you. People are saying things about my character, about what kind of influence I am on him. His jaw tightened like a steel trap. I don't give a damn what they think. But I do. These people will be his neighbors for the rest of his life. They'll be his teachers, his friends' parents, Clara. His voice cut through her spiral of worry like an axe through kindling. My son is healing for the first time in 8 months. He smiles now. He plays with his toys again. Yesterday I caught him trying to whistle while he fed the chickens. That's all that matters to me. She looked up at him, this man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders but wouldn't let anyone else's judgment add even an ounce to his burden. But what if they're right? What if I am setting a bad example? What if nothing? He sat down across from her, his weathered hands flat on the wooden table. You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see a woman who reads to my son every night, who teaches him his letters with more patience than I knew existed, who hums while she cooks, which is the first music this house has heard since Margaret died. His voice grew rough with emotion. I see a woman who makes my boy laugh, who tucks him in and kisses his forehead and makes him feel safe enough to be a child again. So no, I don't care what a bunch of gossips think about your virtue. The next Sunday morning, Clara stood at her bedroom window, watching families walk to church in their Sunday best. She decided not to go, to spare them all the uncomfortable whispers and pointed stares. That's when she heard boots on the stairs. Elias appeared in his black suit, hat in hand. You coming to church? I thought, maybe it would be better if I stayed home today. Samuel's waiting for you by the wagon. She looked out the window and saw the boy sitting patiently in his little suit, his hair slicked down with water, looking like a perfect angel. They don't want me there, Elias. I want you there. Samuel wants you there. That's enough. When she walked outside, Samuel immediately took her hand. You look pretty, Mama Clara. The word Mama stopped her cold. When had he started calling her that? When had she become so precious to him that he'd claimed her with the most sacred title a child could give? Together, they rode to town, a family in every way that mattered. And when they walked down Main Street toward the church, with Samuel between them holding both their hands, the whole town watched in stunned silence. Elias never spoke a word in her defense. He didn't need to. His actions thundered louder than any sermon. But in the distance, 3 riders still waited on the hills, patient as death itself. Some debts don't forgive. They only grow hungrier. They came at sunset, when the light died red across the plains and shadows grew long enough to hide in. Clara was teaching Samuel his numbers at the kitchen table, watching his tongue stick out slightly in concentration as he carefully formed each digit. 7 plus 3 equals 10. 8 plus 2 equals 10. Simple arithmetic that felt like the most important work in the world. Very good, Samuel. You're getting so smart. He beamed at her praise, and her heart swelled with protective love. This child had become everything to her, the son she'd never had, the purpose she'd never known she needed. That's when she heard them. Steady and purposeful, growing closer. Clara's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She'd known they would find her eventually. Men like Jake Morrison and his crew always did. Debt collectors didn't give up, they just got meaner. Samuel, go to your room. But we're not finished with the numbers, and I want to show Papa how. Now, sweetheart. Something in her voice made him obey instantly. He'd learned to recognize danger, this boy who'd lost so much already. But Mama Clara? The word hit her like lightning. When had he started calling her that? When had she become the center of his small world, the person he turned to for comfort and safety? Go upstairs and stay there until I come get you. Promise me. I promise. She watched him climb the stairs, her heart breaking with every step. If these men took her away, what would happen to Samuel? What would happen to this family she'd accidentally built? 3 men dismounted outside, their spurs jingling like funeral bells. Hard faces weathered by sun and cruelty, eyes that had seen too much violence and enjoyed it. Jake Morrison led them, a man who collected debts in pain when money ran short. They didn't bother knocking. Clara Sullivan. Your time's up. Elias appeared from the barn, alerted by the horses. He took one look at the situation and stepped between the strangers and his house, rifle materializing in his hands like an extension of his will. This is private property. State your business. We got business with the girl. Daddy borrowed heavy before he died. $200 plus 8 months interest. Makes it near $300 now. Clara's legs nearly gave out. $300 might as well have been $3,000. She'd never seen that much money in her entire life. I paid what I could, she said, stepping onto the porch. Her voice sounded steady, but her hands shook like leaves in a storm. $50 ain't payment, girl. That's just insult added to injury. Jake Morrison stepped closer, and Clara could smell whiskey and malice on his breath. Your daddy was a gambling fool, and now it's time to settle his debts. How? She asked desperately. I have nothing. You already took everything. Oh, we'll find a way for a pretty girl like you to work it off. There's houses in Denver that pay good money for young women willing to work hard. The implication hit her like a physical blow. They weren't just talking about taking her away, they were talking about destroying her completely. From behind her skirts, Samuel peered out, drawn by the commotion despite her orders. His face was white with terror, but his small hand gripped her dress like armor. I'll come with you, Clara whispered, trying to keep her voice from breaking in front of the child. Just, please don't hurt them. Smart girl. Let's go. One of the men, a scarred brute named Tommy, reached for her arm with hands that had done terrible things. That's when the world exploded. The sound ripped from Samuel's throat like his very soul was tearing in half. 8 months of silence shattered in one desperate, earth-shaking scream that seemed to split the evening air. Every person in the yard froze. Even the horses stopped moving. The sound echoed across the ranch like thunder across an empty sky, so raw and primal it raised the hair on everyone's necks. But Samuel wasn't finished. The dam had broken, and everything, 8 months of grief, fear, love, and desperate need, poured out in a torrent of words. She's my mama. You can't take my mama. His voice cracked and squeaked from disuse, but it carried the force of absolute conviction. This child who hadn't spoken since his mother's funeral was finding his voice to save the woman who'd become his world. The debt collectors stared in shock. This wasn't what they'd expected. But Samuel wasn't done. He broke free from the porch and threw himself at Clara's legs, wrapping his arms around her with desperate strength. I already lost one mama. I won't lose another. She's mine. She's ours. Don't take her away. Tears streamed down his face as his voice grew stronger with each word, 8 months of silence making his declaration even more powerful. She reads to me every night. She teaches me letters and makes pancakes shaped like horses and knows how to fix my nightmares when I wake up scared. She sings to me and hugs me and I love her. He looked up at Clara with eyes full of tears but burning with fierce devotion. Please don't let them take you, Mama Clara. Please stay with me and Papa. Then he spun to face his father, This small boy who'd found courage in the face of losing everything again. Please don't let them take her, Papa. Please. She makes the house warm again and she knows how to make you smile and she's our family now. Clara dropped to her knees, pulling him against her chest as they both sobbed. This child, this beautiful, brave, broken child, had just claimed her as family in front of God and everyone. Had found his voice to save the woman who'd helped him find his heart. Elias's face transformed completely. Shock gave way to understanding, then to something primordial and dangerous, a father's protective instinct multiplied by love. He stepped forward, rifle raised and steady. You heard my son. She's family now. She's under my protection. Touch her and you'll answer to me. Jake Morrison looked at the rifle, at the cowboy's granite expression, at the child still screaming his love for the woman they'd come to claim. Rancher, you don't know what you're getting into. This debt ain't going away. The debt's mine now, Elias said quietly. Send me the papers. I'll pay what's owed. $300 is a lot of money. Then it's a good thing I've got cattle to sell. The collectors looked at each other uncertainly. They'd come expecting to collect a helpless woman, not face down an armed rancher willing to die for his family. This ain't over, Sullivan. Yes, Elias said with deadly calm. It is. They climbed back on their horses, muttering threats, but they rode away. The moment they were gone, Elias dropped his rifle and knelt beside Clara and Samuel, pulling them both into his arms, this woman who had saved his son, and the son who had just saved them all. Son, he said, his voice breaking with 8 months of unshed tears. What did you call her? Samuel looked up through his tears, suddenly uncertain. My mama. Is that wrong? I know she's not really, but she feels like... No, Samuel, Elias whispered, looking at Clara with eyes full of wonder. That's exactly right. In that moment, as the sun set over the Montana plains, grief's long winter finally ended. And spring, real spring, began at last. 6 months later, the ranch felt like it had always been home. Morning light streamed through kitchen windows adorned with yellow curtains Clara had sewn from fabric they'd bought in town. Photographs lined the mantel now, Samuel's school picture, a family portrait they'd had taken at the church social, even a small framed image of Margaret that no longer brought pain but sweet remembrance. Samuel chattered constantly now, as if making up for 8 months of silence by never stopping the flow of words. Every morning brought new questions, new observations, new laughter that filled the spaces where grief used to live. Mama Clara, do you think horses dream? Because Thunder was moving his legs while he was sleeping, and I think maybe he was dreaming about running through clouds. I think that's a beautiful idea, sweetheart. What do you think horses dream about? Freedom. And carrots. Probably lots of carrots. Clara laughed, flipping pancakes while Samuel sat at the table drawing pictures of dream horses. These quiet morning moments had become precious to her, the ordinary magic of family life she'd never expected to have. Elias no longer hovered in doorways like a ghost haunting his own home. Now he sat with them at breakfast, contributing to Samuel's endless stream of conversation, his presence no longer distant but warm, protective, sure. Sleep well? He asked Clara one morning, his voice soft with an intimacy that still made her heart skip. Better than I have in years. His hand brushed her shoulder as he passed, gentle, reverent, a touch that spoke of love growing deeper with each shared day. Good. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been built through 1,000 small moments, shared meals where conversation flowed like water, evenings by the fire where they planned Samuel's education and the ranch's future, quiet talks after Samuel went to bed where they slowly revealed the wounds that had shaped them. Clara learned that Elias blamed himself not just for Margaret's death, but for every moment of Samuel's pain afterward. I should have known how to reach him, he'd confessed one night. I should have been enough. Love isn't always enough on its own, she'd replied gently. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes help. That doesn't make your love less. Elias learned that Clara had been carrying shame about her father's debts long before the collectors came. "I spent my whole life trying to be good enough to make up for his failures," she'd whispered. "I thought if I was perfect, maybe God wouldn't punish me for his sins." "You're not responsible for his choices," he told her firmly. "You never were." Love in this house was still mostly unspoken in the big, dramatic ways. But it lived in every small kindness, in the way Elias brought Clara wildflowers from the meadow, in the way she mended his shirts with extra care, in the way they both tucked Samuel in each night and stood together watching him sleep. The town gradually accepted what everyone could see: the boy was thriving. Where once he'd been a ghost haunting his own life, now he ran and played and spoke with joy that couldn't be faked or ignored. At church, families no longer turned away from them. Children played with Samuel after services, drawn to his infectious laughter. The church ladies, slowly, grudgingly, began including Clara in their conversations. "How's Samuel doing with his reading?" Mrs. Patterson asked one Sunday. "Wonderfully. He's already reading books meant for children 2 years older." "That's fine work you're doing with him." The acceptance was slow, cautious, but real. Clara had proven herself through consistency and love, and even the hardest hearts couldn't deny the evidence of Samuel's happiness. The preacher, Reverend McKinney, spoke one Sunday of family, not just blood relations, but the bonds we choose to honor. "Sometimes," he said, his eyes finding their pew, "God places people in our path not by accident, but by design. Sometimes the family we need is the family we build through love and commitment." Clara and Elias's eyes met over Samuel's head. No words were needed. They'd all found what they'd been looking for, even when they hadn't known they were searching. Back at the ranch that evening, as autumn painted the leaves gold and red, Samuel grew suddenly serious during their bedtime reading. "Papa, do you think my first mama would like Mama Clara?" Elias considered the question carefully, as he always did with Samuel's deeper thoughts. I think she sent Clara to us. I think she knew we needed her." "Me too. I dream about them sometimes, and they're friends. My first mama tells Mama Clara all my favorite songs and which stories make me laugh." Clara wiped away tears as Samuel snuggled deeper into his covers, already drowsy. "She tells her how to take care of us," he mumbled sleepily. "And Mama Clara promises to love us forever and ever." That night, as winter's first frost touched the windows, Samuel fell asleep with a book about brave knights in his lap. Clara tucked the blanket around him, kissing his forehead with the fierce tenderness of a mother's love. "Mama?" he whispered without opening his eyes. "Yes, baby? Are you staying forever? Really forever?" Her heart caught, as it did every time he asked, not because she doubted her answer, but because his need for reassurance broke her heart. "Forever and always, sweetheart. Nothing could make me leave you. But because I love you forever and always too." In the doorway, Elias watched them with wonder still fresh after all these months. When Clara turned, their eyes met and held, speaking the words they hadn't quite found the courage to say aloud. "Stay," he said simply, stepping into the room. "Not as his teacher. Not as our housekeeper. Stay as my wife. As his mother. Stay as family." She stepped into his arms without hesitation. This man who had learned to speak his heart through actions before words, who had given her a home when she had nothing, who had chosen to love her when the world had written her off. "Yes," she whispered against his chest. "Yes to all of it. Yes to forever." Outside, snow began to fall, the first snow of the season, clean and white and full of promise. Inside, a family sat by the fire, talking, laughing, planning their future together. The boy who had found his voice by screaming his love for the woman who saved him now spoke constantly of the adventures they'd have together. The cowboy who had hidden behind silence now showed his heart through 1,000 daily kindnesses and was learning to say, "I love you," out loud. The teacher who had run from debt and shame now ran toward each new day with joy, secure in the knowledge that she was home at last. He had wanted a teacher for his son. She had ended up healing wounds he'd hidden from everyone, including himself. Sometimes the family you need isn't the one you're born into. Sometimes it's the one that finds you when you're brave enough to love again, when you're desperate enough to take a chance on hope, when you're willing to let strangers become home. And sometimes love doesn't need grand gestures or perfect words. Sometimes it just needs the courage to stay, to show up every day, to choose each other through the ordinary moments that make a life. The ranch was no longer a house of silence. It was a home full of voices, full of laughter, full of the sweet chaos that comes when broken hearts learn to beat in harmony again. And the loudest voice of all belonged to a little boy who had learned the most important lesson of all. Love is always worth fighting for. Love is always worth screaming for. And sometimes, love is worth breaking your silence for.